Ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. When I clap, you're going to go.
Okay.
You ready? Sorry, Daddy's poking his head in here. Okay. All right, you ready?
Okay.
Daddy, if at any point you want to stick your head in here,
please,
you're
Lord.
more than welcome.
Okay.
So, you ready?
Welcome back, Chappelle.
I didn't get... All right, you ready now?
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
I didn't...
One more time.
Let me clap, and then you do it. All right? So, you ready?
Okay. Welcome back, Chappelle. This is Miss Terry. This is Mr. Terry's mama from North Carolina. Today we're going to talk about the American Revolution.
Now tell them what you know about the American Revolution.
I'm going to let Mr. Terry tell you what we know about the American Revolution.
All right. Welcome back, Chappelle. I know that you probably really wanted to see her just go off and talk about the American Revolution in totality, but I'm sure she knows a bunch more stuff than she probably realizes. Like, you know what year it started? What year did it start?
In Bahama?
Yeah, but... All right, so anyway, let's jump into it, all right? I don't want to take up too much of your time on this second flip. We're going to try to keep this thing about 20 minutes. So the way I look at it is we're going to get through as many events as we possibly can, and then once we get through that, we're just going to be done, all right? So, and we'll take over whatever else in class and stuff like that, okay? Now, big things, though. We're going to go ahead and start with a page right here. We're now leaving the Enlightenment thinkers a little bit. Not completely, but they are kind of in our rearview mirror just a touch, all right? So now what we should have right here is, see where it says State of the West? It should say 1700s. Don't write and 1800s, just put 1700s, okay? But as of right now, in Europe, we were seeing a massive movement, a massive intellectual movement known as the Enlightenment, right? So in the 1700s, you're going to see thinkers like John Locke. Well, he's in 1600s technically, but you're going to see John Locke, Rousseau, Baron de Montesquieu, Voltaire, blah, 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 blah. Like, you're going to see all those guys pop up, and they're going to start to expose people to new Enlightenment ideas, right? They're going to start questioning their governments. They're going to start questioning rationality and logic and totality. They're going to start questioning a lot of things, okay? But economically speaking and politically speaking, we got to also kind of take a step back and be like, these guys are talking about a lot of different things, but what are they specifically referencing? Well, in general, when you talk about the West, right, including Europe and its entire holdings or where Europeans have gone, you're talking about a state in the 1700s of very high economies, right? There are a lot of countries out there making a lot of money, as we saw with Louis XIV, as we saw with the English and their East India companies and the Dutch and people like that. You're going to see a lot of money flowing into European countries. Also, you have to understand that there are colonies everywhere, right? There are colonies in South America, North America, Central America, Africa, India, and some of them even popping up in the Moluccas Islands out towards what you now know as Java. Now, and also Indonesia and places like that. Also popping up even in places like Australia. So you got colonies everywhere, and European influence is at an all-time high. But then also, what type of rulers are in control of these colonies? They're absolutists, right? So you've got absolutists in control of France. Not in England. We know that they don't have absolute control in England. They're a constitutional system. They have absolutists in France, Spain, Austria, the Holy Roman Empire, Prussia, Russia. Most of continental Europe is controlled by absolutists, right? And so these absolutists are going to cause both positives and negatives, but one of the biggest things that they're going to start doing because of all these colonial holdings is they're going to be causing massive wars, right? So as these colonies begin to bump up and rub against each other, a lot of wars are going to be set off, right? One of the biggest ones is actually caused right here, okay? And we're going to talk about this one in about 2 seconds, okay? But look at this side of this side right here, 1754 pre-war boundaries. As you can see, there were 3 major countries that controlled area in the modern-day United States and Canada, right? And so you had the Spanish that were down here towards Texas. You had the French that were over here in the yellow region, right? Okay, right here in Louisiana, the Louisiana territory, all the way up into Quebec. And then you had the British right here. Well, what's going to happen when we have issues like right here, this disputed land? Who owns it? Who does it belong to? Where is it going to go? Well, that's going to lead to your big wars that are going to break out, right? And one of the most popularized usage, or one of the most popular wars to discuss when you're talking about these colonial wars breaking out is the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War, okay? So just so you know, the French and Indian War and the 7 Years' War are technically the same war. They're also technically the First World War, right? So a lot of historians disagree or agree with this, but technically the French and Indian War is considered, aka the 7 Years' War, is considered the first world war because it was the very first worldwide conflict, right? It broke out on every single continent, okay? And it broke out en masse, extremely violent, very aggressive, okay? Now, the big thing about it is you got to look at it in its two main spheres, okay? People who called it the French and Indian War were the people that were discussing the war over the territories in the America, right? That disputed line right there between the Louisiana Territory and the 13 British colonies. Who owns that? Where does it start? Where does it stop? There are no natural boundaries. Catherine Montalbano asked me one day in class, how do we draw borders? How do we know where a place starts and stops? Well, that's a big issue right here, Catherine, right? That's a big issue. They didn't know where their colonies started and stopped. So it's going to lead to a lot of crisis and war. Okay? And the French and Indian War and the 7 Years' War are between two particular culprits, right? The English and the French, okay? And this all breaks out in 1754. But it's called the 7 Years' War when you talk about the war over land and rivalries in Europe. So if I jump down to, back it up. There we go. If I jump down to, these are the war they were having in North America, right? They're going to be arguing over that disputed territory right there. And this is the war map of the 7 Years' War in Europe. So as you can see right here, there were the French allies here in purple, the British allies here in yellow, and they're going to be fighting over this disputed territory here, which is outside of Austria in a region known as Silesia, right? So, and that's going to break out in 1754 as well. And this European theater of the war is due to a lot of lingering resentments, particularly between Prussia and Austria, because there was a war of Austrian secession when Maria Theresa took the throne in 1740, and there was a lot of different things like that. But you also have to understand that Europe is in trouble internally. I like to describe Europe as basically this, as being very gilded, right? So that right there is a gold-covered. Yeah, it's basically what it is. Like, Europe at this time was like a gold-covered piece of poop, right? Because there are major problems that are happening internally inside of these states. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that absolutists are losing massive amounts of money in this war. By the way, jot this down with the French and Indian War, the English emerged victorious, right? The English won that war, okay? They're going to win, and all of their allies are going to reap the benefits. Prussia is going to annex Silesia, and it's going to become part of their empire. Austria is going to lose some land. The French are going to lose almost every bit of their territory in North America. So jot that down really quick. The English win the French and Indian / 7 Years' War, okay? Now, absolutists, since they are losing money in these wars, they're going to begin to raise taxes, right? Absolutists and constitutional monarchs are going to do this as well, okay? So since there's so much war going on, you need to pay for that war because war costs a ridiculous amount of money. So where do, kings, whether they be constitutional or absolutists, where do they find their money? From taxation, right? So taxes are going to begin to rise to pay for war debts, okay? People are going to also begin to starve. They're going to be poor harvests. So you've got this issue right now where people are moving into cities, like we talked about in the Enlightenment era, right? And they're running out of food, okay? And then you've got monarchs that are taxing these people heavily, and they can't even feed themselves, let alone pay high taxation, right? So you're going to see an outbreak of these things known as revolutions, right? Led triumphantly by one of the best examples you could ever discuss when it comes to a revolution, and some would consider the only truly successful revolution, okay? But what a revolution is a forcible overthrow of a government or a social order in favor of a new system. So what's going to start breaking out throughout different areas of Europe in the late 1700s due to absolute control and due to the Enlightenment, because the negative actions of the absolutists and the positive ideas of the Enlightenment are going to merge together to create this idea in the citizens of Europe's head, also in the citizens of the Americas' heads, that you could overthrow your government and install a new one that you would prefer, that would maybe treat you better, possibly. But as we know with ours, there's going to be a lot of stuff that you're going to learn about in your American history classes with Miss Palladino, and she is amazing, and she will tell you all about that stuff. But we are going to do a little crash course in the American Revolution, right? We are going to talk about the 10 big examples, right? And we're going to talk about how the American Revolution was the reaction to all these negative actions by kings, leaders, and the wars that were going on in the 1700s, right? So, really, really fast, you do not need to copy all of this down unless you want to, okay? But these are the top 10 events of the American Revolution, and we are going to run through these things pretty quick, okay? Now, the big thing, though, if you want, you are more than welcome to hit pause real quick, jot these things down. They will work like a table of contents in your notes, or you can take a little screenshot of it if you want, and you can save it for later, okay? But we're going to keep on going, all right? So we're going to try and get as many of these done as we can. So the American Revolution actually goes all the way back to the 1600s under this guy, right? Oliver Cromwell. Remember when we discussed Oliver Cromwell and how he's no fun and he started the Commonwealth system and he outlawed everything that was fun? He outlawed bars and drinking and singing in the streets after the English Civil War. Well, the thing about it is he's also going to induct this thing known as the Navigation Acts, right? And the Navigation Acts are considered the very, very first action by the British government that is going to lead to the American Revolution, right? Because this is going to be one of the earliest acts or that actually pushes the Americans to believe they should be a separate state, right? And the Navigation Acts under the Commonwealth was, because Cromwell is awful, he's going to sign a set of acts that are going to prevent American colonists who are British by birthright, British citizens, from trading with anyone but Britain, all right? And a lot of this is in reaction to the fact that the American colonists, who are beginning to see themselves as Americans, no longer as British citizens, because the earliest colonists were actually there and started their colonies as early as 1610, and so this is 1651, and as we know that mortality rates are very, very high during this time period, so you're talking about almost into the second generation of people that may have been born in the Americas. They're beginning to see themselves as less of European citizens and more of American citizens. And they believe, since that they are American colonists so far away from the English, they should be allowed to trade with whoever they want to make their lives more profitable, because if they're more profitable, they'll pay more taxes, and it'll make the British crown happier in the long run. But Oliver Cromwell comes in and passes the Navigation Acts because he's a big jerk, right? And he says that colonists must trade on British vessels, right? And they were mainly mad about this because it turns out that the Dutch could give them goods for cheaper and could ship their goods for cheaper because they're the Dutch and they invented capitalism, right? The anger level as of this moment is at a medium. The Navigation Acts are passed. The American colonists take this one on the chin and they're like, you know what? Fine, we'll sell it through the British, whatever, right? And so it ends up making them aggravated. But the second event then comes in, okay? So the Navigation Acts happened in 1651. But then as of 1754, the British debt is going to skyrocket, mainly due to the French and Indian War and the 7 Years' War, right? Since the British defended the colonies in the French and Indian War from the French and from the Native American tribes that they allied with, the French and Indian War is going to cause a massive amount of debt. It's going to actually double the national debt in Britain from 77 million pounds to 140 million pounds, right? Now, pounds, just so you know, if you don't know this, is a sterling pound or a pound sterling, which actually stands for basically a pound is the British unit of monetary exchange, right? So we have dollars, they have pounds, right? So basically it's saying $140 million is going to be the actual growth in debt of the British crown after the French and Indian and 7 Years' War. So since this occurred, the British crown decides, you know where we could get some of that money back from? Where can we get some of that money super, super quick? We can raise taxes on the American colonists, right? So this is going to begin to where the anger is going to grow, right? Due to the fact that the French and Indian War is going to cause so much debt to the British crown, they're going to raise taxes drastically to try and make up some of that money, because they begin to look at the colonies more like a piggy bank and less like a extension of their own crown, right? And here's the biggest problem. The Stamp Act is the very first act that comes into play, and that's going to be from 1765 to 1766. And you'll notice we said 1754 is when the French and Indian War happened, so 1765 is this first tax that comes in after that war summarily ends, right? And it's also going to bring rise to the famous saying that you all know of as, no taxation without representation, right? We're going to decode that saying here in about 2 seconds. But what the Stamp Act was it was a huge tax on all printed materials, right? These printed materials, whether they be letters, bills of exchange, decks of cards even, like decks of playing cards, had a stamp on them that the British would tax because it was a printed material, and it almost doubled some of the cost of very, very needed items. Like ink, writing materials, print shops had to succumb to these, and paper. And the result of this is the American colonists are going to violently revolt against this tax, particularly with a very famous saying no taxation without representation. Now, let's decode that really quickly. The American colonists are saying, do not tax me if we do not have representatives in Parliament. See, this is one of the big things you need to understand. The American colonists had every right to be angry about taxes. Some people argue that, oh, the Americans needed to pay taxes because the British protected them from being murdered by the French, which is very true. However, all the Americans wanted early on was just some representatives in Parliament to support their stance, right? They said, do not tax me if I do not have someone I voted into Parliament to advocate for us to prevent taxes from coming down heavily on the colonies, right? And so there's going to be opposition. There's also even going to be violence, right? This right here is a very, very famous piece in front of the Liberty Tree where American colonists begin to post advertisements saying we will not be taxed without representation in Parliament. And as you can see right here, it's in the pixelated image, I know, but these are American colonists tarring and feathering a British tax collector, right? Where they would literally coat the person in tar and then put feathers all over them, and the tar was very hot. It would scald their skin. It was also almost impossible to get off of their skin very easily without rubbing their skin down to the hide. And then also they would force the British colony or tax collectors to drink hot tea, apparently. So they would actually beat up tax collectors during this process, right? So now we're seeing the growth of violence from the colonists. We're now seeing a lot of resentment coming from the colonists, and we're also seeing the British are probably getting a little bit upset, right? Now, as you can tell, the British Stamp Act does not last for very long, right? It actually only lasts for about a year, and it's repealed in 1766 due to the opposition and due to the really good argument that the American colonists made, right? Now, the other major event that's going to happen about 4 years later is known as the Boston Massacre, right? So, and the Boston Massacre is going to happen because tensions are beginning to grow, right? And what ends up occurring is a little boy actually leaves his master's wig shop, right? So a little boy leaves, and he's walking through the streets of Boston. He's walking through the streets of Boston, and he spots a British regular, right? And a British regular is wearing the red coat, and he's a British soldier, right? And so he's standing out front of the Commons House, right? When the Commons House is the actual, like, the customs house, okay? And so it's a tax collecting office, and it's where they actually put customs taxes on everything that comes in through the ports, right? So they have brought in an excessive amount of British soldiers to keep the colonists from flipping out, right? So they began to occupy Boston. Now, since these tensions are growing, they brought in more British soldiers, and more of these British soldiers need to do certain things like buy goods and have a daily life in the colonies. And so apparently one of them had bought a wig from this boy's master, right? Or his, like, who he's apprenticing under. The little boy goes up to this particular British soldier, and he begins to poke him in the chest, right? He begins poking him. He's like, you didn't pay my master for the wig that you bought. You didn't pay for the things that you said you would. Turns out he actually had paid the stuff off the day before, but the little boy had no idea, right? And so he's poking him, he's getting mad. And you have to remember that these tensions are growing, right? And the fact of the matter is a big crowd organizes themselves around this boy, and a bunch of British soldiers come out to support the British soldier who's being ridiculed, right? And a bunch of colonists show up, and they begin to throw things at the British soldiers, including sticks, rocks, snowballs, and other items, right? One actually comes out with a cudgel, which is like a baton for beating people with, and he actually throws that at a British soldier. And accidentally, a British soldier lets off a shot. And the other 9 British soldiers with them go, "Cow, cow, cow," and they also let off shots. And 5 people were killed instantly, right? One of them, the very first person to die, was actually a man by the name of Crispus Attucks. And Crispus Attucks was a former slave, and it was actually like of black descendants, and he was the very first person to die in the American Revolutionary cause, right? There's a memoriam statue for him actually in Boston to this day. It's very cool if you ever get a chance to go see it. Now, the result of this, though, some of y'all are asking yourselves, like, okay, so a little boy poked a guy in the chest, threw a snowball, some guys let off shots accidentally, only killed 5 people. Why are we calling this a massacre? Because we talked about the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre where several thousand people were killed. That deserved to be called a massacre. Why would anybody call this a massacre? Well, the Sons of Liberty, which is a growing group of revolutionary citizens in Boston, Philadelphia, and the Northeast, are going to mass publicize this event, and they're going to call it a massacre. Why? to gain favor for their side. By calling it a massacre, you make the British look like the bad guy, and it's going to tell the rest of the colonists that they're there to get you, right? That they're going to come into your house or into your city and shoot your relatives and things like that. So the mass publication is going to create extreme tension, right? And then we're going to end on this crash course, and we'll talk about the other 5 big events coming up in like the next in our next class. The Boston Tea Party and the Tea Act, right? And the Tea Act is going to come in after this really big resentment has been made, because the Tea Act is going to give a monopoly to the East India Company of Great Britain, right? The British East India Company is going to put heavy taxes on their tea. They're going to also get a monopoly on the product. So the Tea Act in 1773 said that this taxed tea is the only tea that the colonists are allowed to buy. You are not allowed to buy any other tea. Well, this is a very, very frustrating move for the colonists, because they could get cheaper tea from the Dutch, right? Now, the tea wasn't as high quality, but it wasn't heavily taxed, and it was almost half the price, right? And so one night, they're all going to get so mad about this heavily taxed tea that they're going to go to the Boston Harbor dressed as Native Americans, and they're going to throw the expensive East India tea into the Boston Harbor, practicing civil disobedience and refusing to pay the taxes that are being excised upon them by the English, right? And that's another very famous event as well. So I will talk about the rest of this stuff later. I hope y'all have a great rest of your break. I'll see you guys soon. Y'all have a good one.